Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today in this second event in a series of IESE interviews with thought leaders around the world in the area of learning, be that learning in the classroom, workplace, or the digital space. Today we're talking with Edward Hess, professor at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. Edward has had a long and very accomplished career in the business world as well as academia. He has published prolifically on the topic of business growth, strategies for growth, managing growth, and more recently, his prime area of interest has been on building learning organizations. Ed, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very good. So let me start by asking you the following question. So one of your recent books is titled Learn or Die, right? Using science to building leading edge learning organizations. Well, let me say this. This is a big statement, right? Learn or die. So could you maybe talk a little bit to us about why do you believe that learning really has become an imperative for organizations to succeed and perhaps survive in today's environment? What's really different about today's environment that makes learning such an important topic for them?
Well, I think the difference today is the context, what's going on in the world. Technology is basically driving, if you will, connectivity globally, driving real-time decision-making, giving consumers lots of power. And all of this with artificial intelligence coming down the road is basically putting more pressure on businesses to be more responsive, more adaptive, more agile, more innovative. And when you look at what underlies agility and adaptability and what underlies innovation, what underlies even operational excellence, it's fundamentally the ability to learn. And the ability to learn for adults is the ability to unlearn and learn anew. And I really believe that we're in an era where every company is going to become a technology-driven company that's in the business of learning, and the speed and quality of your organizational and thus your individual learning will be the strategic differentiator, because that will lead to behaviors that lead to innovation, lead to differentiating value creation. So it's the building block.
Right. That's very interesting. So in a way, what you're saying is that learning will become, in a way, a new foundation for competitive advantage. It's not any particular capability that will give firms competitive advantage in the future, but rather it's this meta capability of learning that will allow them to kind of develop new capabilities on the ongoing basis. Am I interpreting
Yes.
your prior statement correctly?
Yes, you are. And yes, and
Okay.
thus learning becomes a strategic imperative. It's not a nice to have. It
Right.
is a got to have, and that's going to transform businesses internally, because a learning culture is very different than many cultures that are out there, and it's going to transform human resources into human development organizations. Human development is going to be much more critical than, quote, managing human resources.
Right. Very interesting. So let's see. I would imagine that all our listeners and viewers would agree with you that the learning culture is going to become hugely important. The role of HR will change. Can we make this perhaps a little bit more concrete, a little bit more tangible for our attendees? Could you perhaps offer a couple of examples of organizations that, in your opinion, have made this transition successfully or are in the process of this transition and it looks quite promising?
Yes. If you look from an innovative viewpoint, the exemplar company that I write about and that I've researched is Google. If you look at a company that focuses on creativity, the exemplar is Pixar Animated Studios. If you look at an organization that is a critical thinking or analytical thinking organization, the exemplar that I've studied is Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. If you look at an operations type of organization, I went outside the business world and looked at the United States Navy SEALs, an organization that is superb at what they do, and they're a learning organization with a learning culture. If you go on and look at Intuit, who I've studied, Intuit has been on almost not quite a decade, about an 8-year journey to transform themselves into a learning organization. Other organizations are W.L. Gore, and all of these organizations are United States-based organizations because that's where my research has been based. W.L. Gore, IDEO are good examples of learning organizations.
Interesting. So the range of examples that you've offered is actually quite broad, right? I mean, from, in a way, the usual suspects. I mean, anyone would expect Google to come up in this list, but also, you mentioned some other organizations that many of us perhaps would not think of in this context, right? So if you look across all these organizations, I mean, what are the common patterns? Or I guess what I would like to ask is, if you think about the vehicles, the levers of building and learning organization, what are these?
Yes. The right people in the right environment with the right processes. And what's fascinating, all these organizations are highly selective in the people that they hire, and they they use analytics and testing and extensive interviewings to try to hire people that have a learning mindset, similar to a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's good work at Stanford University. They have a culture. What's so fascinating, whether it's Google, Bridgewater, the Navy SEALs, there's a common culture that runs all through these organizations. And that culture is basically characterized by candor, permission to speak freely, an idea meritocracy, permission to experiment and fail within financial parameters, a very humanistic, people-centric culture in the sense that there's psychological safety and people's self-determination needs are met. When you wrap all of this up, if you will, with a specific design to mitigate the two big learning inhibitors, ego and fear. All of these organizations focus on how do we reduce fear and how do we reduce ego. So there's a cultural consistency. That was so fascinating about the research and quite frankly, surprising. The other thing, the third component is processes. All these organizations rigorously use learning processes daily because they basically understand that we human beings, without processes, without rigor, without self-discipline, we will revert to our natural reflexive, cognitive, and emotional ways. So what's fascinating is the dominance of processes, checklists, templates, if you will, list of questions to make sure at the end of a meeting, did we cover these things? What did we miss? With real feedback, constant feedback on one's learning individually and the organizational learning. Constant, if you will, after action reviews after each meeting, personally and organizationally. So the magic formula, if there is a formula, and remember, it's all human based and humans are the key. How do you basically drive human performance? It's at the right people in the right environment using the right processes. It takes all three. 2 out of 3 doesn't do it.
Very interesting. I mean, honestly, you mentioned so many interesting things. I'm almost at loss, which ones to follow up on. So let me start with this one. So you mentioned processes. You really emphasized the importance of processes. I just want to make sure that kind of our audience is clear on what we mean by that, because in a way, processes are also a very common attribute of traditional industrial age organizations. In fact, we use processes to make things more formal, to make things more scalable, which in a way is the opposite of learning. So could we maybe compare and contrast the kind of processes that many of us have in mind when we think about organizational processes versus the kind of processes, and I have a feeling you're thinking more of, rituals and kind of methodologies that we need to follow to really facilitate learning. Can we explore a little bit deeper, this topic?
Yes. Examples of processes that are commonly used. Root cause analysis, all right? A rapid experimentation process. After action reviews, reviewing what just happened in this meeting, and did we follow good collaboration processes? Good listening processes? Did we follow good critical thinking processes? So we'll have a critical thinking checklist. Those types of processes which go to how people behave
Correct.
and what types of questions they ask and how they ask questions to collaborate. What I call a meeting process. Many organizations have a meeting process. In the meetings, the person who owns the meeting will say, I own the meeting. This is the purpose of the meeting. Is it discovery? Is it critique? Is it debate? All right. Is it whatever? Try to find the root cause. The purpose of the meeting means let's use processes that are going to help us get to that point. And the processes really come out of, you're right, their methods. It comes out of the science of learning, comes out of, if you will, cognitive psychology. And I left out premortems. Premortems by Gary Klein is a process which many of the organizations I study use. So people use these processes to overcome cognitive biases, or mitigate them, to make sure that they're okay. Are we collaborating at our highest level? Am I listening at my highest level? Am I asking more questions than I'm advocating? Am I asking people to clarify, etc.? Those types of, if you want to call them rituals, habits, but it really comes down to learning, really comes down to behaviors. How I behave and how you behave. And I'm real big on behaviors. I'm not real big on learning competencies and organizations that have 50 to 70 learning competencies, okay? The human beings basically can only remember, 4 to 7, and it's closer to four things at any time. What's the key behaviors? And the key behaviors to learn are having a quiet ego, managing your thinking, managing your emotions, reflectively listening, and connecting and collaborating with other people. That's it. And so it's processes that basically, how do I manage, how do I think, my checklist, how do I manage my emotions, my fear, my defensiveness, the stuff that gets in the way of learning. Those are the type processes that I'm talking about. And some of them overlap. Root cause analysis is a critical operational excellence process, right? Yeah. After action reviews are a critical operational excellence process. So, I mean, some of these processes would be system-wide, company-wide, no matter what you're doing.
Sure. I think this is very, yeah. Does
that help?
Yeah, I think this is very helpful. This is exactly the direction where, I wanted us to go to. And again, I mean, I very much share and like your focus on behaviors as a foundation, behaviors or practices as a foundation for fundamentally learning. One other thing, I wanted to come back to your comment on kind of the main inhibitors or the main obstacles to learning, and you identify those as ego and fear, right? And this is also quite interesting, right? And I would like to ask you about these two in a fairly particular context, right? So you also mentioned that experimentation and the ability and the willingness to fail is in a way a foundation of a learning organization, right? But again, if we look at our traditional industrial, organizations, most of our companies have been built on the logic of never fail. I mean, failure is being seen as something that is bad, right? I mean, that is something that we have to avoid at all costs. And now all of a sudden we invite in a very different logic that, today you can kind of summarize as fail fast, right? I mean, experiment, get feedback, fail fast. But this creates huge tensions, right? At the level of ego as well as at the level of fear. So what's your take on this? I mean, again, maybe some of the examples that you've seen.
You're quite correct. There is an inconsistency. And I spent 7 years of my career working with operationally excellent companies, 99% defect-free, on-time types of organizations, if you will, no variance, who wanted to try to become innovative. And it's the conflict that you're talking about that really led me to 8 years ago to focus on learning. Because if you think about operational excellence, better, faster, cheaper. How do you become better or faster? Well, you got to do something different than you're doing today. Well, how do you figure out what that thing is? Well, you try something and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then you continually modify. Well, what is that? That's learning. Innovation. Innovation is doing something that's really different for you. It doesn't have to be different from the world. I mean, that's rare, but different from you, that requires you to do something new. How do you learn how do you do something new? You try something. Learning is the fundamental underlying thing that basically makes it possible for a company to be operationally excellent and innovative. Once you decide, is this an operational excellent or an innovation process, then you have two different standards of variance: 99% defect free for operational excellence. In innovation, great innovation companies fail 90 to 95% of the time on their experiments. So you have the complete opposite end, but that's okay, because I'm going to use different processes and I have different financial parameters that I go under. And so I'm putting on my innovation hat. It's okay. Forget everything I learned in school. Don't make mistakes. Forget everything on operational excellence. Now that I'm in innovation, I've got to go try things. And of course, I'm going to basically iterate and learn by my failures. It's okay here. My ego doesn't have to feel bad. I don't have to worry about looking bad. I don't have to worry about making mistakes. I don't have to worry about being liked by people, because we're going to have constructive dialogue. I got to be fearless. And I can't get my ego all wrapped up in my idea being correct. I can't get my ego wrapped up in being right, because I'm confirmation biased. I generally am a suboptimal thinker based on the science of adult learning. So tamp down my ego so I can see new things. I can hear new things. I can consider them. I can explore. And so you're quite correct. And the challenge for an organization is how to incorporate that learning culture, which gives permission for innovation at the same time that the operational stuff is 99% defect free, in training people how it's okay to flip the switch and don't worry about making mistakes. And good companies, all innovative companies, if you think about it, all creative companies are ultimately also operationally excellent, because they've got to execute, they've got to produce, they've got to scale what they're doing. And you talked about scaling. Really what my work tries to do, if you will, is provide a way for companies to scale innovation, scale creativity, scale, if you will, the highest level of learning in a way similar that they can scale operational excellence. But it's flipping, it's knowing, okay, wait a minute, what type of situation am I in here? Ooh, I got to fix this machine. Okay, that's very different. That, wow, we want to figure out if there's a different customer need we're missing.
Sure.
Makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Now, I've been just listening to you, and what I'm thinking is that in a way we're starting to ask a lot more of the individuals that comprise the organization, right? So I think we've had a very interesting conversation about learning at the level of organizations, but ultimately it boils down to the individuals, right? And the learning requirements, if you will, the need to learn in the individual level is becoming elevated drastically as well, which may not be a very comfortable kind of situation to be in for individual workers. So can we maybe talk also a little bit about, learning at the individual level? You talk a lot about, the future organizations as smart machine, smart machine organization, smart machine world. So in that context, how do you see kind of the new learning requirements and as well as the new learning opportunities at the individual level?
Yeah. And you're exactly right. An organization can't learn unless its people learn.
Yeah.
Because an organization's made up of people. And when my Learn or Die book went to press in December of 2013, I came to the same conclusion you came to. And then I went back and took all my research and spent a couple of years. And that led to what I call my Learn or Die 2.0 book, which is the book that was just published in January, which focuses on how does an individual learn. And The science, the cognitive science, the psychological science is pretty clear. We are suboptimal learners. We're suboptimal thinkers, listeners, relators, and collaborators. Cognitively, we basically only process information, and we seek to process information which confirms what we already believe. We have built these inner stories of how the world works, and we go around and we selectively process. And if you bear with me a minute, I'll give you a personal example that is extremely humbling, all right? In November 2015, I was in London giving a talk on all of this, and my wife came with me, and we love London and we love the museum, so we went to the British Museum, and we were having lunch at the British Museum. And I'll make it quick. We're having lunch. My wife, we're sitting there, and I'm very close to my wife. We're sitting at a table that's really a table for two. And she says, would you like French fries with lunch? Because I'm going to have a salad. And I've been married long enough to know that the answer is yes, even though I don't eat French fries, because if I answer no, she won't order. So I say yes. So I'm noticing there, and the waiter comes in, and the waiter brings a saucer, a little saucer, all right, and puts it down between us. And I look at it, and the saucer is half full of ketchup. And that really upsets me, because I say to myself, this inner talk, this is cheap. What we're paying for lunch, my wife deserves a whole saucer of ketchup. I want more ketchup for my wife. The other side of me says, don't say a word, because your wife's told you for 35 years she'll solve her own problems. So I don't say anything, and I'm stewing. I'm getting emotionally engaged with this ketchup. And I know it makes no logical sense. Okay, I accept that. Lunch comes. She holds up a French fry. Would you like a French fry? Yes, I would. She said, would you like ketchup or mayonnaise? And I said, what? She says, would you like ketchup or mayonnaise? And she dips it in the mayonnaise. Now, the saucer was not white. I cognitively did not process that mayonnaise, even though I looked at it multiple times, and it was as close to me as something on a table. Why? Because where I grew up in the United States, you ate ketchup on French fries, and you ate mayonnaise on tomato sandwiches. I was cognitively blind. We are cognitively blind. We seek to process information which confirms our stories. We create these big stories, mental models of how the world works on very little data, and we generalize. Not only do we seek to confirm, but we are emotionally defensive. We deny and defend what we believe because we define ourselves by what we believe, what we know, how much we know. All of that gets in the way of learning. That inhibits me or you or anyone watching being a good learner. So therefore, you've got to overcome those, and you got to mitigate that. How do you mitigate that? One, the gateway is having a quiet ego and basically redefining what smart means to you. Smart no longer is how much you know or what you know. Therefore, I don't have to immediately defend it. Smart is, I define smart by the quality of my thinking, listening, and collaborating skills. The quality of my thinking. Am I a good thinker? Do I use good thinking processes? Therefore, my ego's not tied up in anything I know. Why is that important? In the world we're going into with smart machines, we are never going to know more than a smart machine, all right? The second thing is, then I got to manage my thinking, and I got to manage my emotions. I got to be emotionally sensitive to what I'm feeling and manage my fears. I got to be emotionally sensitive to you so we can relate. I got to be able to connect with others. And so that's why I said before that human resources is going to turn into human development. Most of us haven't been trained this way. I wasn't educated this way, okay? Most schools today don't educate people this way. Good companies are involved in training their people and educating their people to overcome their cognitive and mitigate their cognitive and emotional proclivities, to overcome our humanness. That's why there's processes. The science is also clear. You or I cannot overcome our confirmation biases or our biases by ourselves. Herb Simon, the great Herb Simon, Nobel laureate and one of the founders of artificial intelligence in this country, at least, and founder of Carnegie Mellon, said, "Isn't it amazing how those people who agree with us tend to be smarter than the people who don't?" Danny Kahneman said, "It's so much more fun to critique other people's thinking to have our thinking critiqued."
Sure.
This concept, we need others, and this has got to be a learned skill so that you and I can have a conversation. You can challenge me. I'm not defensive. I say, "Why do you believe that? What's your data? Let's evaluate your data versus my data. Your data is better than my data. I need to change what I believe if I want to be a good thinker." That's what this is all about, getting down to the behaviors. Does that make sense to you? Make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And really, what I'm hearing in the story that you've shared and kind of the observations is, in a way, it's a similar idea. The same way that we need to find a way to develop learning into this meta capability at the level of organizations. The role of the educational system as well as the HR, if you will, function within organizations similarly is to help individuals develop the ability to learn into a new meta ability, if you will. So the focus of education is shifting from helping people develop specific skills and knowledge to helping them develop an ability and an approach to continuously developing these new skills and knowledge on an ongoing basis. So it's very much the same analogy that operates at the organizational level as well as at the individual level.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. It is. You're quite correct. And if you look at organizations like Google, managers at Google do not have any responsibility or authority in hiring, firing, pay raises, bonuses, perks, awards. That's done by a different committee, small committee. Right. The manager's job at Google is to help develop people and remove obstacles to innovation. They have redefined, quote, management into a development, and that's why I've written recently about what I call the demise of traditional leadership. All right, you can't command and control or direct learning. You can't command and control people to be innovative or creative, or I can't direct you to think better. Okay, but I can, as a leader, enable that. I can enable that through my team culture or my organizational or group culture. I can enable it through my behaviors, all right? And I can enable it through working with you and helping you develop by giving you feedback and doing measurements on, are you defensive? Are you curious? Are you open-minded? Okay. Do you seek out challenges to your thinking? Do you actively go look for data which disconfirms what you believe? All of this stuff. And so this whole concept, it's a transformation of the role of a leader, the role of in human development becomes sort of integral in the organization of the future, because the organization future is going to excel to the extent it can unite the highest level of human capabilities with the smart technology. And whoever does that best will win. And the smart technology is going to be a commodity. It's going to be available to everybody. So what's the difference? Right. You're the difference.
Yeah. No, this is excellent, really, because one point that in a way, the last question that I wanted to ask you, but you've already answered it, how the role of leadership is shifting or evolving in this whole context, but I think you've just described it in a very eloquent way. So if if we can spare a few more minutes on this, I would like to go back to the audience and take a few questions from the audience. So I'm just looking at what we have here, and in a way, we've discussed many of these things, but perhaps this one, again, a little bit more hands-on. What are the key areas for corporate learning that go beyond what is trendy at the moment, right? I mean, could we try to tackle that?
Well, I don't see it as a trend out there. People confronting ego and fear and removing them as learning inhibitors. I don't see that as a trend. I don't see as a trend organizations, if you will, adopting candor and an idea of meritocracy up and down the organization, in a sense that devaluing rank and power and elitism except for compensation. So I'm a lot of what my research is about, at least from my perspective, and I'm only one person, all right? My research is limited by the number of people that I can do. I don't see these yet as trends. I see them being talked about. I don't see them being adopted and executed at the speed that they need to be executed, because the technology changes that are coming over the next 5 to 7 years are huge. And it will take an organization 5 to 10 years to make the transformation we're talking about. And if organizations don't start today, they're going to be behind the curve. So, and I'm reacting too much to the word trend. There is a lot of talk about artificial intelligence. That really began in spring of really February, March of 2015. So in the last, really even more 2016, the last year and a half, artificial intelligence is in the newspaper or in the business stuff every day. There is the job issue out there, but the transformation of companies to become human development organizations, to be the what people need to do, how education systems need to transform, how HR needs to transform, I still think is at the has not been widely accepted.
No, I agree with you. And you know, as you were speaking, I was kind of just thinking, I think our focus on trends, that goes back to something that, you discussed before. In a way, it's just manifestation of one of the cognitive biases that we as humans have. I mean, right, we tend to kind of jump on things that everybody else is talking about. And the issues that you discussed before, I mean, I think they're a lot more foundational than trends per se, right? And so let me there's another interesting question which also relates back to something that you mentioned before. So the question is the following: how can employees be taught to think more creatively rather than monotonously, in a way? And I think this connects back to your idea that your research really looks at how we can scale learning and creativity. How can we teach, or how can we help employees to think more creatively, really at scale, if you will?
Well, let's go back to the basics. We got to create the environment where they feel comfortable doing that. So that environment is basically based on 3 psychological principles: positivity, a positive emotional environment, because positive emotions enable creative thinking, where negative emotions inhibit it. Psychological safety, I got to feel safe, that I'm in a safe environment. If I try to be creative and fail, you're not going to hurt me in multiple ways. And I got to feel that basically I got to have trust. I got to feel like my worth, my values, my ideas are respected, etc., by you, and meet my self-determination needs. So I got to create the right environment, but then I've got to put you in a situation and give you the right processes. I just can't tell you, hey, go be creative. There's processes out there, whether it's design thinking, whether it's other types of processes. Okay, well, how do we basically jump out of ourselves so we can not only see what we don't usually see, but we can see what others don't see? And so there's lots of those processes. So I got to be in the right frame of mind, the right psychological comfort, with the right people I trust, using the right processes, and then somehow, the science says, magic will happen. But You study great artists and great musicians or even dancers. And it's so amazing to me that I'm talking about world class, and they still talk about overcoming fear. Okay, sure. Overcoming fear. That overcoming, am I going to look bad? Are people going to still like me? Am I going to disappoint people, etc.? It's that being at that point where psychological flow. When can you and I be in a situation where it just flows? And I'm not worrying about what do you think? A lot of people sit here and say, gosh, I wonder what he thinks of me. I wonder, does he like me? I wonder this, and this. But the reality is, you're not thinking about me. You're thinking about you. You're thinking about what I think about you. And if we basically get rid of all that stuff, quiet it down. Everybody listening to this or watching it has been in something where they've been in the zone or in the flow, or they didn't realize how fast time passed because they were their full self. That's what I'm looking to scale.
Right.
That's what I'm looking to scale.
And then just to add to this, if I may, I think also from my experience, from my research, and to really foster this kind of environment and to really see it succeed at the organizational level, it takes a lot of perseverance and it takes a lot of continuity on the part of a given organization. It's not going to happen overnight. These changes, they really need time to unfold and really materialize, right?
You are exactly right. And you said several points there very concisely and eloquently, and every one of them is powerful and right. You miss on any one of them. You miss on perseverance. You miss on patience. You miss on, every one of them. And you're exactly, that's the challenge for organizations. And in some ways, that's the exciting thing, that the fact is that this is really going to be a big winner take all. The organizations that do this are going to basically, leapfrog or just be so far ahead of organizations that don't. The end product, the other thing, it's not just organizationally, but the human end product. Because when you talk with humans and you work with companies and you see people change, they don't just do this at work. They go home and listen differently. They go to meet with friends and listen differently. Their life changes. We're talking about also changing life and how people live, and it's just amazing to see people all of a sudden be beaming.
Yep. Well, Ed, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your insights. This truly has been a very interesting and very enjoyable conversation. And as I mentioned before, I cannot agree with you more that learning has become this, hugely important meta capability that will help organizations succeed and thrive in the future, right? And I also think it's a very exciting time for all of us, even though it's causing a lot of anxiety, it's causing a lot of angst at the level of individual as well as at the level of business leadership. But it is a very exciting time because it will create many opportunities for existing as well as new organizations in the future. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Enjoyed being with you. Great conversation.
Great.
All the best.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope, or we hope, that you have enjoyed this conversation with Ed Hess, and we also look forward to seeing you again and welcoming you again in our next event, which will take place on June 21st. Thank you so much, and goodbye.